Hello, podcast listeners. We know podcasts are a great way to catch up on a program that you may have missed on KSJE, and it's provided as a free service of this radio station. But KSJE is now listener-supported, and so while you enjoy this podcast, we hope that you'll also take some time to join KSJE. Become a member today. It's quite easy to do. Just go to our website at ksje.com/support and pick the level of support that best matches your budget. Thanks again for listening. Here's your podcast.
Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm the host, DelSheree Gladden, and this week I have Jim Kristofic here. We had been planning to have Edison Eskeets, the co-author, join us for this, but he's unfortunately ill. So we are going to talk with Jim about their new book, Send a Runner, A Navajo Honors the Long Walk. Jim, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Jim Kristofic, Irish nishle, do Slavic bashish, ado British dash che, ado Polish dash nale. My name is Jim Kristofic, and I am from Ganado, Arizona. I had lived there for formative years of my life when I was about 6 to when I was 16. I graduated from Page High School. My family moved to the western edge of the res. And since then, I have educated myself as a public school teacher. I work as a high school English teacher, but I also pursued a career in journalism and worked as a journalist. And I continue to work as a journalist today. So I try to stay active as a journalist. And I moved back to the Southwest, 2014. I've been writing about the Southwest most of my life and observing the Southwest most of my life. And it was during that time of learning that I worked as a park ranger in the summer of 2012. And that is where I had formally met Edison Eskeets, who was the co-author of this book. And that was when our friendship started to solidify, started to become something where we started building a dialogue with each other, so that in the visits over the years, when I would return to the trading post and speak with him, by the time the summer of 2018 came around, he approached me and invited me to kind of bear witness to this run that he had planned. And I did so during that summer and watched him write the book with his body. And then I, at the same time, by observing him, wrote the book with words. And that is how our partnership formed around this book.
That's such a beautiful way to describe it. As I have been reading the book, I wanted to know how you guys came together on this, how you collaborated in getting this story out there. And it's also mixed with a lot of history, which I'll ask you about in a little bit. But yeah, tell me about the collaboration between you and Edison on compiling this experience into words.
Well, during the run, Edison was only focused on the run. And he would talk to me when it was appropriate, when he was resting. But if he were here, he would say this, that in the writing of the book, we met 2 times. That's it. We maybe only talked for an hour each time, maybe. That's it. And he would tell people that to show that the connection we were able to have about the story was rather unique. That is not common, just to have 2 meetings and then this book. Our first meeting, I guess the first time we actually really met each other was in the summer of 2010. When I was there in Ganado and I had been doing oral histories. I was out there on my own dime, just camping in the wash or staying in like older buildings on the Ganado campus near the hospital. They were able to house me there. And I was going around the community, interviewing people, looking in the Hubble archives, doing what you call in journalism, maybe like field research. And that was where we first crossed paths. And I could tell by speaking with him, he had a lot of knowledge. He was working there at the Post. He was like an art historian there, and then became the trader around 2012. But I sort of got an idea of who he was, and I did some research on him. He had told me about these ceremonial runs he had done, and to me, they seemed kind of impossible. Like, what do you mean you ran 500 miles? Like, that's crazy. Why would you do that? And how did you do that? I knew he had done it as an older man when he was like in his mid-40s, many years before, when he was the dean of students for the Native American prep school. And he had done those runs to fundraise for the school, and they were very successful, which at the time was one of the top-rated prep schools in America. And it was almost all Native American students from all over the country in Rowe, New Mexico. So he told me about these things, and it seemed very kind of like almost too good to be true kind of story. And I went, oh, okay, well, let me look into that. And I did look into it, and there was documentation on it, but not a lot. And there wasn't any documentation about his character and the kind of person I could tell that he was. And I felt that was a tragic letdown or a shortcoming on the part of the journalist. There was one article about one of his runs, but it was very analytical, sports-related article. It didn't get into his motivation very deeply. And I sort of filed that story, that experience, into the back of my mind to say, well, someday maybe I'd like to approach him about writing something about him, because I could tell he had done these things. They were very interesting. He had a story to tell. But I never either had the courage or opportunity to approach him about it. And I didn't have to, because he approached me. And the way he did it was he gave me what would look like a press release. And he gave that to me when I went to meet him in the winter of 2018. He said, this is what we're doing. It was kind of like a mission statement for what was going to happen. And I said, great, I would love to do that. And then we went into a side room there in the trading post and had coffee and talked about what he was trying to do with this run, about the long walk, what his focus was for it, what he was hoping to achieve through it. And so I just followed what he said and said, okay, well, I'll see you there that morning. And I was there, and then the run happened. We had that one meeting at the beginning of the run. And then we did another meeting at the end of the run after he had read the first draft that I had written. And I wanted to go over that with him to make sure that everything was clear, the Navajo writing was correct. And that was it. And then the book went forward.
Wow. That shows a lot of trust on his part. I think that's really neat that you guys were able to form that connection.
Yes, I think just because he had seen how I arranged the book, the way I had paced it out day by day, the way I had decided to juxtapose or pair the past and present at the same time. These were all ideas that just came to me. They were gifts that I listened to during the run. I did not enter the scenario with that concept in mind. I was paying attention to what was happening around me, and that form suggested itself from what I was observing. And also the way to frame what he was even doing. Why would a person do this? Typically, when you read books about running or about athleticism, it is always around a competition aspect. I remember at one point I was talking to an editor about this book, and one of the things they wanted to do, they wanted to put on the cover an image of Edison like crossing the finish line in triumph. And that, I had to tell them, that is not what this is about. But that suggests how the metaphors are part of the soil of the American psyche around any athletic event. It's always about competition and winning. And he could tell from the first 5 pages that I wasn't going to be thinking that way about this subject matter.
Yeah, I can see that. And I have to say that the ending of the book, as I approached it, I was kind of wondering, how is this going to wrap up? Because you had mentioned throughout the book, it wasn't a competition. There wasn't really, a finish line or some big media type thing planned for the end. And when I got to the end, I thought that it did wrap up really beautifully in a way that showed this was a highly personal experience for Edison, for the people who went with him and helped him. And I really felt like that meaning, the message came through really well by it not being, something that here was the time, here was the stats, basically, like would be with most sports-oriented or athletic-oriented stories. It really focused on the message and the purpose of what he was doing.
Yes. Like, for example, if I was going to I did look at publishers in New York City for this story at first, and every inquiry I made, I received a reply of high interest. But what I ultimately heard back from those entities or felt from their tone was, well, is he breaking a record? Is this going to be the first time in this amount of time he's going to get to this? And I was immediately like, yeah, you don't get it. Okay. And they wanted to see that. But ultimately, what you mentioned about Edison trusting me, I suppose that is true. One of the things he said at the very beginning when we sat down to talk, he said, all of this whole run, it is already done. It is already finished. And we're just going through the motions. And I didn't know what he meant by that. Then he put his finger on my notebook where I was taking notes, and he said, even that is done, talking about the book. If you could use the word like on a subconscious level or a level that is deep wisdom or collective wisdom, that is, I think, why the beginning and the end do mirror each other that way, because the run, the whole concept, the whole story of survival began in reverence and in the vision of it, which is what you have at the beginning. And it takes a lot of action to arrive back at the vision, which is right there in the four sacred mountains. It's in the basket. And Edison had said, without my background living there on the res like I did, and I do dawn prayer with white corn, I follow those ways as best I can, not being completely fluent in the language. I think he understood that I had that in me, and that helped inform those metaphors, the patterns of the language in the book.
I remember I watched the interview that you did with Scott a while back, and you mentioned something then that it can be challenging to write about specific history in the Southwest and what's happened here for audiences who don't know that much about the Southwest. And I was really amazed going through this because I grew up here, familiar with the Long Walk and a lot of the history that you did bring up. But there was a lot of it that even having lived here most of my life, I didn't know. Those weren't incorporated into lessons in school or even my college classes. And I was really intrigued by the way you blended the run and the history, and you were able to write to a wide audience. I think people, like I said, living here, I still found it really interesting and I learned a lot from it. But I think you did it in a really great way that people who are not familiar with this area and with our history also can go into it and feel that they're a part of that.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes, I tried to have a lot of discipline while doing that. One of the things that I tried to focus on was not a lot of big words. Keep the language simple. That is very hard to do. Try not to write any sentences over 18 words long. Make everything active tone. Force myself to take something like history, which is very abstract in itself. And it's why a lot of history books are very difficult to read, because most historians are very disciplined, focused people, but they're not trained writers most of the time. And I just know this from experience, being a trained historian. So I get that challenge there. But with this book, I really tried to use as much journalism technique as I could. And in many ways, mimicking the speech patterns of Navajo people. Like I wanted this to be a book, number one, that every Navajo teenager could pick up and read at any high school on the res. That was audience number one. And then everyone else. And I learned a lot while writing the book. I had to do some research into stories and ideas that I didn't know fully, so I needed to push myself and learn a bit more. But I drew upon a lot that I already knew from those previous books that I had written. I think I had written 6 books before this one. And I had gone over that material, and especially about the Long Walk. And just living in Taos, New Mexico like I do, people talk about that area as well. And I hear stories, even living here, that I didn't know living in Ganado about the Long Walk. So it was an education for me as well. I would say at least 40% of what's in the book I also learned, because I did understand that Edison running on the road, the idea that it's just a guy running on the road, well, that's just literally what's happening. But you have to see the dance. You have to see the history behind it. What stuck with me also was a quote that N. Scott Momaday would say when he would be giving lectures. He would talk about it, interviews and documentaries he would be part of. And he would say the Southwest is a land that has to be seen to be believed. But there are many times when it has to be believed to be seen. And that's having mythological knowledge and know what you're even looking at. And I thought that was a very interesting thing for him to say, because he grew up out here also, out near Jemez, and spent time on the Navajo res. And so I tried to have that mindset while paying attention to what Edison was doing.
I think that's very true, that quote from Momaday, that this is a very unique part of the country. It intrigues a lot of people from other areas, but I think until you really come here and experience it, it's hard to understand and really take in all the different aspects that make up the Southwest and its various cultures and its larger culture.
I agree. If I had not grown up here the way I did, I don't think I would have been able to write this book. No way.
It definitely would have been much more challenging, I think. But yeah. I was curious with some of the research that you did, because a lot of what happened, especially from the perspective of the Navajos, it's not always things that were fully documented and recorded. So I was wondering if a lot of what you researched, if it is in textbooks, if it's written down, or if these were oral stories that are passed on that you've come across, and just how you research something that, from the perspective of the Puebloans and the Native Americans in this area, probably was not represented very fully in the written word.
Well, that's true. That's a very good point. When you rely only on the written word from the United States, when you're talking about the long walk, you're essentially relying on the testimony of the criminal who's doing the crime only. That's a problem. You can't do that only. And what was interesting, though, and what's fascinating, is that these people who did what I would call a crime didn't think they were doing a crime, which is also fascinating. And it happens a lot in history. And so they left very accurate records of their doing the right thing. That was their perspective. So if you approach it with the correct perspective, there's actually a lot that the U.S. military, the territorial government of New Mexico left behind in their records, in their dispatches, their daily correspondence. Now, I did not feel I had the time to actually go to the Library of Congress and pull all those archive records myself, but there was an author prior to me who had done all of that, and really two authors. One was David Brugge, and the other was a historian named Frank McNitt. And now I never met Frank McNitt. He wrote two great histories of Navajo culture, like Navajo country. One is called The Navajo Wars, and the other is called Indian Traders. And David Brugge was very much a mentor of his and pointed him in the right direction. And I did get to meet David twice, and he had read my first book, Navajos Wear Nikes, and he gave a very generous blurb for that book and promoted it, and I was very happy about that. But those two guys helped me save years of time finding the information, because they had logged it all out in their writings over the years. So that trail was there. The other part of the trail of this information came from forward-thinking Navajo people in the 1970s and late 60s who did sit down and record these stories in oral histories that were used to make books that the Navajo Community College Press published. And those books are out of print. They're hard to find. Fortunately, I live in the Southwest, so I can go to stores like Opsit. And a lot of times they'll have those monotypes or those editions of those books, and I have found them in those places and bought them and have them in my little personal library. So I was able to draw on those. I was able to draw on what people said when I was growing up. Most of the people I grew up with in Ganado, Arizona, their ancestors went on the long walk. They're the descendants of the people who survived that. So I would hear stories a lot growing up as well. My stepfather is Navajo, and his dad would tell me stories also. And so combining those things, it made a good collection to tell that story, where I didn't have to just rely on the notes that the military left behind, which are important because criminals doing a crime they don't think is illegal. And so that's an interesting perspective. They'll talk in a certain way that if they really thought they were doing something wrong, and some of them did. Some of them did not agree with the long walk and how it was done, which is why it ended. But those who didn't necessarily disagree, they left behind a record as well.
I think it's really neat that you were able to pull so many resources together and bring this really comprehensive background to what Edison was doing with his run. And the structure, you mentioned earlier that you hadn't gone into the project with that structure in mind. So I'm guessing when you sat down to kind of start putting everything together, that was the flow that you found, alternating between brief moments of documenting the run and how it was affecting Edison, and then bringing in some of the history. I would just see if you could tell me a little bit more about that process.
Oh, sure. Well, I sensed that that would be correct on the first day of the run because I was watching Edison run through Chin-Lee, which when you approach it from Canyon de Chelly, you're coming from the east and you run down the hill off that elevation down into Chin-Lee. And when he did that, he was moving along the road and people really started seeing him for the first time in abundance. Before that, not many people had seen him. He was just running from Canyon de Chelly, which is kind of isolated, not a lot of people on the road. But now we were actually hitting real traffic and like more congestion. And a lot of people were honking and like celebrating, going, yeah, go. Like they understood what he's doing. Just when they see him running, he's got a rattle in his hand. He has a bandana on his wrist. And the car that's behind him says long walk. Or the car in front of him says long walk on it. And people understood. But I also saw people on the road who were not from the res wondering, what is this? This guy is running on the highway, on the side of the highway with these two cars pinning him in. And the first car is his nursing station, mobile nursing station / cafeteria. And that was Lorraine and Jason, his sister and his brother-in-law. And the back car was me. And when they saw that, they were confused. And so I wanted to show what was really happening, and it is so hard to convey that without metaphor and without the techniques of poetry and literature. So by juxtaposing them the way I did, I knew it would be jarring for readers at first, but like the act of running, where one foot strikes and then the other foot strikes and they go back and forth and back and forth, they make a rhythm that pushes the runner forward through space in a controlled fall, essentially. I thought the text could do that also. And the process was that I did write everything he did physically real, like in the historical moment first. Then I did go back into the history and I wrote everything there next in 2 separate documents. And all of this, the first draft, I wrote all of this by hand with a pencil and a steno pad. That's very important, I find. I do that a lot, especially when I want to be very efficient, because I know I do not want to physically have to write too many words, and my body will make me more concise by just handwriting it. And that works to me very well. So I wrote it all by hand, and I would write it very early in the morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I would be done by 6. I have 2 hours of writing, and I'd go on my day. I was working on a farm on the Navajo res at the time at St. Michael's, Arizona. So I had to go do my farm work all day till 9 o'clock at night. And then I'd come home, and I just did that over and over and over and over and over for 2 months. And then the rest of that fall, so I would take those 2 manuscripts then, and then I would make them work together by kind of copying and pasting them against each other. And in many cases, it was all just there. I did not have to be designing. I didn't have to be manipulative. I put this one. Really, it was like, I'll put this amount of words, then that amount of words, and this amount of words, and that amount of words. And the subject matter very much matched serendipitously or by the design of what is waiting behind us. Mm-hmm. That's very effective.
Yeah, I felt like it flowed together really well, and I really enjoyed the structure of it.
Well, thank you.
And we are getting close to being out of time, but I wanted to see what you are working on now and if you have some future projects. Oh,
sure. Well, I just had a book come out. My 7th book came out. It's actually late being released because of COVID supply chain issues. It was supposed to come out in May, but it actually came out in, I think, September. So it's out now, and it's called House Gods. And the subtitle is Sustainable Buildings and Renegade Builders. And it's about sustainable building in New Mexico, what that looks like, what does it mean to live in a building that honors the earth, that makes us less of a dangerous species to the world we live in, and how it can help honor the gods, honor these ideas that Navajo people, these energies that Navajo people have been singing about for a long time, and living in a way that you're proud of your life and that you can feel your own compassion for other people. In a way, you're learning to build buildings you can live in so you can live with yourself. That's the idea. And I worked on that book for 5 years. I worked every summer here in Taos, starting with the earthships, but looking at way more effective methods that are all just here in northern New Mexico, available to everyone, but not a lot of people have the time to go out and learn them. So I put that information in this book, House Gods. And it addresses the climate problems we're going to have. And, and even if we don't have them, who cares? We should still be doing these things. That's my perspective. And then I'm also working on some fiction projects. I wrote a novel over the COVID time, which I have not submitted or anything like that. Then I'm also starting to work on a book about a very special canyon in New Mexico that relates to Navajo history. So I'm approaching that right now. And this past summer, I used a lot of the methods that were in the House Gods book to build a sustainable adobe hogan here in Taos. And so I'm probably going to write a how-to book about how I did that, with the idea being that this is a structure you could build that will help you gather rainwater, live with solar electricity, keep food without refrigeration, just like most of our ancestors did in Europe and in America before the 20th century. And it all worked because we're here. I mean, they survived. They got us here. Abraham Lincoln never flushed the toilet in his life. He crapped in an outhouse just like Thomas Paine and George Washington. So looking at those concepts in the book should be interesting. And I'm working on that book right now. And there are 2 or 3 other concepts that I'm working on. One is a historical novel that's set on the Navajo Res. I'll be doing that. And that's basically what I'm working on now.
Well, it sounds like you have some good projects to keep you busy, and the House Gods sounds really fascinating. I'd love to read that. And are most of your books available pretty much everywhere?
Yeah, pretty much everywhere. I know they sell them at local bookstores in Santa Fe and in Taos, and probably in Albuquerque as well. I'm sure in Farmington as well. They sell them at the bookstore at San Juan College. You can find them online at all the book retailers you'll see there. And I am currently, just this last weekend came back from Santa Fe, and then this weekend I'm using the weekends to record the audiobook of House Gods. So that should be done soon as well, because most of them, I think except one book, is available on Audible as well through Amazon as an audiobook. And some people like it when an author reads the book, and so I read all the books.
That's great. I really enjoy that as well. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to meet with me. I know you're super busy, and I really enjoyed learning more about the book and your process with it. So thank you for coming on today, Jim.
Oh, thank you so much. You're a very good interviewer. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks.
Did you enjoy that podcast? We hope that you did. And if you did, share it with your friends. And if you really want to keep podcasts like this coming, please support KSJE. You can do it easily online at ksje.com.